Hey, welcome in and welcome back. And we've got a good one for you today. Pretty timely, given the time of year that it is. We've got a month under our belt already. 2023 has wrapped up and put a bow on January, and we are creeping into February, guys. So, what better time to talk about than now? How to create some momentum and prepare for some growth. I want to call this one Traction and Trajectory. And we got the answers for you to the test. We got 3 keys to creating momentum and preparing for growth on this episode of Last in Line. Welcome to Last in Line podcast, where we are highlighting, showcasing, and spotlighting great leaders of faith who have overcome adversity, cultivated resilience, and served others in a significant capacity. So settle in and be encouraged by this episode of Last in Line podcast. Hey, good to have you. We're encouraged by some of the responses we're getting out there. We're encouraged with some of the guests we've had in 2022. We got some good ones coming up. I am humbled by that because literally don't know how that's happening in some cases, other than to just say, God has his hand on this. God gave it to me, going on 3 years ago, and I've tried to be obedient, and he honors that. And so he's sending people to me. He's allowing me to have conversations. He's allowing me the skill set to actually facilitate a dialogue that makes sense and honors a guest. So that is beyond any of my own strength. So I'm humble about that. I'm grateful for that. And thank you for listening. If you're out there, I know you are, if you heard that. So today's a good one. I'm amazed, again, back to how God just sort of gives me stuff and expects me to steward the gifts and steward the wisdom and steward some of the insight and perspective he gives me, steward the experiences, actually use them for your benefit or for my kids, my family, coworkers, anyone's benefit that's out there. Our experiences, your experiences are there to benefit someone else who maybe we walk ahead of, someone who's following in our footsteps, or maybe even alongside, that we can lock arms with. We can sort of glean off each other. Iron sharpens iron, but our experiences, my experiences, could be for someone else to either replicate or avoid. So I view those as blessings. And so the experiences and the thought and the insight God gives me for stuff like this comes out of the blue. So I don't know why I'm supposed to be talking about this today. As I raise my Black Rifle coffee mug in salute to you, my audience. It's a rainy day here in South Texas. Supposed to drop down in the 30s again. We've had a good stretch of 60s and 70s. So we were about due for a cold snap. But I will say, the traction and trajectory title of this, I'm an alliteration nerd. And so that I'm not smart enough to come up with that myself, though. But it went off and ignited in my spirit to run with this idea. So traction and trajectory. Okay, that's snappy, that's catchy, that rolls off the tongue. It might even get your attention, but it really is in relation to the context of momentum and growth. So, weird analogy, but you've watched the, oh goodness, Warrior, dadgummit, Ninja Warrior, great Ninja Warrior, whatever. The one where the obstacle, I don't even know if that show's still on, but they have an obstacle course and they got to run and jump and hang and swing. And so the part at the end where they run really fast to get momentum and then go up this steep incline wall and grab the top and pull themselves up, right? American Ninja Warrior, that's what that's called, right? Okay. You're nodding your head like I'm an idiot, but I have seen it. It's been about 2 years, but yeah. So that wall that they all is sort of the crescendo at the end of this obstacle course that sort of puts a stamp on their completion of the course. And so, but think about the momentum they have to get in order to ascend up that ramp, up that incline to get to the top. That's a great metaphor for growth and momentum here. You've got to create some momentum. You've got to get some traction in order to create momentum, obviously, but the momentum has to ultimately lead to something. I say has to. Normally, the intent is that it does, and it's in your best interest if the momentum you're creating leads to something that does, in fact, incline and does actually elevate yourself above your current state. So that's what I think momentum and growth go hand in hand. And everyone that I know is focused and conscientious of doing the necessary work to experience a level of growth that they've identified to be optimal for their lives in their season that they're in, for their family, for their profession, for their physical body, for their relationships with their wife. You know, we're all hoping to be better than we were last year. We're all hoping to move the chains, right? We're all hoping to get the ball down the court a little further and have some individual growth that exceeds what we did last year. I mean, that's kind of what life is. In order to be good for someone else, we've got to be better than we were last year or yesterday or 5 minutes ago, even maybe. That's a little extreme, but you get what I'm going. So I think traction, I know it does, depends on footing. I mean, anyone that tries to run in 3 or 4 inches of mud that's like chocolate pudding, you're not going to get much traction. You're not going to run real fast, are you? You may not even be able to stand up. So traction depends on footing. And I think we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But a good cadence establishes traction you can count on. Traction that's duplicatable, if that's a word. You know, if the more traction I can get, one foot in front of the other, my cadence becomes repetitive. It becomes habitual. It becomes something that allows me to eventually gain speed and momentum. Trajectory is tricky. Okay, we're going to talk about traction and trajectory. I got 2 big points on traction, and then we're going to kind of land the plane on this conversation with trajectory, because that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. Pardon the pun. That just kind of came to me. Rubber meeting the road, trajectory, traction. Okay, you got me. You're with me. So yeah, the trajectory can be tricky, and I'll get to some of that in a minute, but we all talk about growth. In business even, we definitely like to have exponential growth, that we can get is more advantageous to a either more lucrative situation financially, professionally. It could be more in our favor from a status and title and professional opportunity standpoint. In our relationships, we love incremental growth. Like we love just 10x, 100x in our communication with our wife. Our sex life got 3 times better. You know, those kinds of things. We love having this exponential multiplication. But I will say, why I say trajectory is tricky, we can get overextended sometimes. And growing pains is a thing. I know some people don't like that term, but growth that is not well thought out and well planned for, and where resources may not be properly and efficiently and effectively allocated, that growth can almost be counterproductive and come back to bite us in the butt. And it all looks good on a balance sheet at some point, but if you can't sustain that, then you eventually, if you can't meet the demand, then eventually you lose those said customers, said goals. They become unattainable at some point because you've maybe grown too fast. So I'll get to that in a minute. Don't want to steal my own thunder here. So we can get, this rocket ship can get rolling too quick sometimes. That's how I think. That's why I think trajectory can be tricky. All right, let's go into this real quick. Let's go to the first one here under traction. I've got number 1 being 3 keys to creating momentum and preparing for growth. So we got traction and trajectory. Traction, I got the first one being the boring basics. To get traction, Some of the stuff we don't like doing, but is necessary. It's like taking out the trash, guys. It's like brushing your teeth. It's the boring basics that set us up with necessary footing to create and establish traction that it ultimately leads to momentum. Okay. And momentum is key. It's key in relationships. It's key in all the things. I'll just qualify this rather than break down every segment of our lives that I think this applies. We'll just say qualifying overarching statement, relationships, professionally, physically, finances, spiritually. Okay. All the aspects of your life, this is going to apply. So the boring basics, I mean, let's be honest, fundamentals are underrated, but they can be very overwhelming in a good way. Like they can mean so much to the process, so much to the big picture. Fundamentals. Okay. If you're in business for yourself, or you're developing a brand, but you can't add 2 + 2 on a balance sheet and budget your resources adequately, it's going to come back and bite you in the butt, and you'll eventually run out of resources. So we got to do the basics, the fundamentals, guys. I mean, I think part of fundamentals in our lives across the board is mentally and physically sharp. We've got to keep an edge. We've got to stay sharp when it comes to our mental state, our physical state, our spiritual state. Body, soul, and spirit. You're going to hear me talk a lot about that in every podcast, maybe, because we are 3-part beings, guys. Talked about that, I think, maybe even last week or the week before. But our mind, our bodies, our spirits, if we're not sound, if we haven't done the fundamentals, what does that look like? Push some heavy weight around, walk around the block, stay active, read your Bible, pray, give glory to God first thing in the morning, right? I mean, these are things that are basic. To me, they should just be cost of doing business, right? They should just be fixed in your life, fixed habits, fixed disciplines in your life, because without those, we don't even need to talk about trajectory or momentum, really. But we've got to nail those down and lock those in, and we've got to stay laser focused on the fundamentals. We've got to get critical mass going in a good direction, a productive direction. What do I say? What do I mean by critical mass? The Pareto rule, Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. You guys know what that is. 80% of your, let's just say, team, okay, does 20% of the work, and vice versa. 20% of your team is most likely doing 80% of the heavy lifting. 20% of 80% of the work, or 80 in this case, 80% of the productivity needs to come from some of this 20% that is fundamentals, small stuff, overlooked by many people. If you are a baseball fan, small ball is a term they use for teams that get on base, steal bases, bunt, sacrifice bunt. They move runners, they advance runners. The batter does what he needs to do to move runners around the bases to score runs. Like small ball. The opposite of that is somebody that just swings for the fence every time and strikes out 90%, but hits one out of the park once. So small stuff, that 20% can mean the difference in that 80%. So I might have just ran that conversation in circles and maybe just made that as clear as mud. But I got to tell you, I believe that's applicable here. I believe that if we lose sight of the basics and the fundamentals that lead to our mental and physical sharpness, spiritual sharpness, relational sharpness, if we overlook the little things, then I believe there is absolutely no way to sustain long-term trajectory and growth and momentum. Okay. I believe that's true. And we've got to this last part under traction for boring basics. I think we've got to coach. We've got to execute a simple plan. So a simple plan could just be, maybe you come up with a vision, a flow chart of identifying targets for, let's say you're developing a product, or let's say you've got a service that you want to provide coaching for a niche group of businesses that are out there. You've got to kind of lock into what that demographic, I mean, what that, not demographic really, but what that looks like from a targeting standpoint. I want this size company. That's a sweet spot. I want with this much team dynamic and this much leadership and this type of business. I want to lock in and really hone in on those as my targets for this coaching that I want to do, let's just say. But that's a simple plan. I mean, flow charts don't have to be complicated. They can give you a visible idea, how to quantify a vision, and how to direct kind of your steps in that direction. So that helps with traction. Just create a simple plan. Don't say that you've got to create $1 million worth of revenue in 6 months for this to be a viable option of the way you want to go, or a viable business or a viable goal. Like, let's start small. Let's say, okay, a win today may not look like a win tomorrow. A win today could be getting myself a contact list of influential leaders in the space that I want to go into. Or, hey, let's do some market research on this widget because it's different than this widget, and it could impact this group of people who like widgets. It could be that simple. So it's got to start simple. It's got to be about boring basics. It's got to be about fundamentals. It's got to be about focusing in on that 20% that could impact 80% of your traction. So there you go. That's the first part of traction. I got another one here for traction, okay? Number 2, under the 3 keys. I've got 3 keys for you. 2 of them will be under traction. 1 will be under trajectory. The second one under traction is, once we identify what good looks like to a degree, let's replicate winning. Let's find out what winning looks like. Let's find out what a little victory is, and let's replicate that. Let's identify the habits, duplicate them. Continue the right reps in the right direction, the right amount of the time, and to the right people. And look, what we've done, we've got a snapshot of what winning looks like, and we're replicating it. So that's what I think traction's a big deal. To do traction, right? To get traction, to multiply traction. I mean, just like I said, how many steps to get to the end of the street? That's 1 foot right after the other. I've replicated that. If you break that down into its bare bones and down to the studs from a concept standpoint, a win is a stride, a step, okay? To get to the other end of the street, I've got to replicate those steps. That little win needs to become a bunch of those little wins. So we do that enough, all of a sudden we're at the end of the street. We've reached our goal. We've attained that said desired outcome. So I say we replicate winning, but you got to identify what winning looks like, right? That goes back to the boring basics. Got to create this simple vision, simple plan. And so replicating winning is a big deal. You got to double down on resources that have proven to be successful or, efficient, have proven to be useful. So they say, chew the meat, spit out the bone, get rid of the ones the resources that you don't need, resources that have proven to be just sort of vanilla and benign. Let's trim the fat on those, and let's lock in on 2 or 3 resources, whether it's people, finances, time, whatever, and double down on those and strategies that work. So we've identified something that works. Let's keep doing it. If I take some medicine that clears up my congestion, I probably want to just take that again, the same thing tomorrow. Like, I don't need to reinvent the wheel if it works. And we do that enough times and we feel fine. So I say that, just to give you an example of something that in a baseball, again, back to that analogy, the baseball lineup, I know athletes are pretty superstitious, baseball players to be specific. And they will not switch. If that team is winning, that batting lineup will not change. I don't care. Even if a couple of the guys are 0 for 10, if that guy batted second, the team's winning and he's over, sometimes they might jockey position around, but they might just keep everything the same. And eventually that guy gets hot or whatever. But maybe it's a bad example, but once they've identified what works, if a pitcher understands I am owning this outside corner, he's going to replicate that because it's proven to be effective. Same with us. In my job, getting to see customers, getting to see key decision makers in the medical field has gotten increasingly difficult over the last 2 years with the pandemic, and now everybody's virtual, or we got telemedicine, we've got hybrid roles of remote and in person, we've got all kinds of dynamics going on, but ultimately it affects a salesperson trying to impact behavior and influence habits of a customer. It impacts me because I can't get in front of them. In order to do that, you got to get creative, right? I found that it's not a secret in my business that feeding employees, Chick-fil-A in the morning for breakfast gets me past a lot of gatekeepers. You'd be surprised. Maybe you wouldn't, but bribery works. So we take food, snacks, coffee, lunch to these places in order to be able to see the right people. It's a racket, but it's the necessary evil. But my point being, I had to stop doing the same thing over and over that yielded zero return. And I ultimately had to come across something that was different and was appealing to the people that were actually making the decision about getting me where I needed to go in the office. So that's what I did, and it's worked. And so now what do? I do that about 3 or 4 times a week. Just bring food in, just not even without a plan, just unannounced. And here I go. I get back and it works. And so I've replicated what winning looks like. And you could apply that to anything. If getting up in the morning for you to work out works, you feel better all throughout the day, you don't have a problem getting out of bed, you've realized that you love that part of the morning, that's what winning looks like. Replicate that. Don't force yourself to go do it at 6 or 7 o'clock at night if you know that you're not ever going to make it out there to work out. So do what works. I don't know. I beat that dead horse. I say the second part of this replicate winning, I say is optimizing your optics, being able to see a bigger picture. So we talked about momentum, really kind of the hinge point for momentum being traction and being footing, right? So footing, allowing you to see the big picture, allows you to see where you need to step, what cadence might work in this particular terrain, metaphorically speaking, obviously. Unless you're an endurance athlete and you're out running, so then it's literal. But I will tell you, the optics of seeing a big picture, seeing over here, maybe being able to predict or anticipate market challenges, market fluctuations, maybe even figuring out what demand might look like 6 to 12 months down the road. I don't know, but you got to optimize the optics. I mean, we can even drill that down right into a spiritual application. You know that the world is what it is. You know that the world's full of sin, full of evil. You know the world's a dark place. Ever since the Garden of Eden, when Adam dropped the ball on manhood, we knew that there was going to be a challenge. Okay, there's an enemy. There's a spiritual realm. He's coming after us. So our optics, we've got to optimize our optics by knowing, right? Don't have blinders on. Don't put your head in the sand, knowing that there could be something that's out there coming at you physically or spiritually. What do? Well, you put on the armor of God, like the Bible says. You get in the Word, you pray, you pour that foundation in you so that it's there when you need it, so that when the storm comes, you've already got a built-in canopy spiritually. I think that could apply in everything, guys. Our optics are key. What we see in our peripheral, what we see in front of us, what we might be able to see coming up behind us in a blind spot. And I'll get to that in a minute when I talk about trajectory. But there's some optics here that are at play. You got to get other insight. Get speaking of blind spot, get a couple of those inner circle people that can maybe tell you that you're missing something. And then finally, under this traction part of replicating winning, once you land on that and you've replicated, get that algorithm locked into your SOP, whatever that is, your business, your relationship. If you know that, I don't know, making your wife a cup of coffee in the morning before she asks for it, it just sets you up for success in the day. Why would you not? Why would that not be part of your algorithm for the day? If you know that your kids don't like 20 questions when they get home from a date or an event, maybe you don't go to that well too many times. Maybe you want to create an open line of communication with your kid, and maybe you just say, hey, glad to have you home. Was there anything that stood out? Was there anything earth shattering tonight? No, which is what they usually say, because we are dumb enough to ask closed-ended questions. But hey, what was cool about tonight, man? I want to hear. That's different than who were you with? Where'd you go? What time did you get there? What time did I say for you to be home? Why are you 5 minutes late? Whatever. So guys, create an algorithm that works. That's all I need to say, because once you identify those little wins, plug that into the algorithm that is in there, that's in permanent marker for at least the time being, until you learn some other ways to create some other efficiencies. Then you pivot, and then maybe the algorithm gets adjusted. But for now, let's just start with that algorithm that works and replicate winning. So the last one. Okay, now we're under trajectory. Now we're talking about hockey stick growth. We're talking about, some of you may be in relationships that went from 0 to 60 in a day, right? And maybe you kind of pump the brakes a little bit, or maybe your business just took off like a rocket ship, and now you're like, oh crap, we're outgrowing ourselves. We're outrunning the pace that we kind of had projected for this particular product or service. Now we got to scurry and we got to circle the wagons to really figure out and identify some procedures that can allow us to maybe slow down the game a little bit. We all want this huge trajectory of growth, right? We say we do. Be careful what you ask for. But I think, trajectory is a good thing, clearly. But I think we can potentially get out over our skis at times, and our eyes get too big for our stomach when it comes to certain things. Trying to think of a way to relate this to relationships. You guys dated for a month, and now all of a sudden she's the one, and you've got wedding bells already going, and you haven't even met her parents. You don't know where she is spiritually. You don't know a lot about this person. It looks on paper like, hey, we're doing really well. You've got all these ideas, but man, you need to pump the brakes. You need to start figuring out some things that in between the lines, right? You got to fill in the gaps here. Between the goalposts, there's 100 yards, right? 100-yard lines of yardage. And I say that's the same in relationships. That's the same in business. Rocket ship growth, hockey stick trajectories look good, right? Look good in Wall Street's eyes. They look good on the balance sheet because those equate to dollars most likely. But are they dollars you can sustain? Or is it a flash in the pan? You made $100,000 on this 1 month of revenue, but you don't know how to meet the demand now. You don't know where that growth needs to go. You don't know what to do now with all these customers. You don't know how to reach and service them. What if there's a problem? So yeah, growing pains are a thing. We all want growth, but I will say, look, we need to be strategic in how we approach that. I would say, so under trajectory, calculated risk is okay. There are ways to take yourself out there on that ledge a little bit without jumping off that cliff. And I think there's ways to determine where you're getting complacent or comfortable, and then where you're maybe positioned for getting outside the box a little. Collaboration, I told you I'd come back to that. So I think that's part of it. I think that when we talk about blind spots and getting other insight, I think collaboration is a risk. I think even any time that you're developing something, getting other like-minded people that you trust involved in the process, in order to maybe collaborate forces and, eventually engage in this growth component. I think that's a little risky sometimes, right? You don't know it's going to work. You don't know that it's going to justify the resources it may take on the front end. But again, that's a calculated risk. I think incorporating other leaders in the space, who might already have a presence, who may have some wisdom, who are, again, aligned with you spiritually, like-mindedness is huge. I think somebody that's willing to tell you some brutal truth, be honest with you about some things, and you got to be humble enough to take that constructive criticism. So got to get those other leaders involved. And then this other one here under calculated risk, for trajectory, I think we got to stretch our capacity for discomfort. We got to be willing, I guess, to experience a little friction. I know growth is painful. I mean, we all know that. We've talked about that in the past, like lifting weights that I've done for 25, 26 years. Like, to experience growth, it's painful. And if you're not sore the next day or the next 2 days, you didn't lift enough weight. That's always been my philosophy. So growth is painful, but it's temporary. And then again, you put weight on the bar and then you grow some more. So we're not necessarily always trying to get to our full potential tomorrow. Like, this could be a stair step process, and most of the time it is. But to hit that trajectory that sometimes looks better than it really is, from afar, it looks bright and shiny and attractive. But then when you get in the middle of it and you're in the weeds, sometimes that growth you would have rather had gradually. So I'm just here to tell you, I'm all for it. But let's take calculated risks. Let's stretch our capacity for discomfort. Let's incorporate some other leaders that are in the space who maybe have been down the road or have an expertise that we don't have. I think offsetting your skills is important. So what you're not great at, look for those people that are, that's their wheelhouse. I think that's important. So if we stretch our capacity for discomfort, we have a little higher tolerance for pain in whatever that is, relationships. Let's use that as an example. You don't like chick flicks, you're the guy that goes and watches all the Navy SEAL movies and reads all the Jack Carr books, which is great. Those are tremendous. But guess what? There's two people in a relationship. So you might be forced to get outside of your comfort zone and go watch something that she likes. And trust me, there are long-term benefits to doing that. I mean, I don't have to draw you a picture, but investing in those things that may not come naturally to you are not always bad. So we got to stretch ourselves. We got to create maybe a new segment of reach, not in relationships. I'm not talking about go out and try to find a new segment of relationship. I'm saying like maybe in business, if you want to diversify a brand offering, or you want to diversify product, you want to maybe tap into a different area of a service that you're providing. I don't know what that looks like for you, but maybe there's something that you could, you've grown all that you can organically with your current offerings. Maybe you notice there's a demand here that might line up with what the core benefits that you offer already are. You can tweak a few things and meet this other demand in this other segment. So I think that's a valid risk worth taking. And I don't even know if it's a risk, really, if you're not, reinventing the wheel. Like I said earlier, if you're not doing that and you're not turning the basics upside down, the core that has made you what you are now, if you're not turning that upside down, but you're just maybe putting a little bit of a tweak or an adjustment on something that currently exists, I think you're good. That could be physically, you could be, and this might be for me, you could be so focused on weight training, and maybe you decide, I'm going to maybe take a jog around the block 3 days a week, or maybe I'm going to walk for 15 minutes, 2-3 days a week in, as adjunct fitness to the current weight training I do. I need to do that. I need to do more cardio. I'm sorry. I just do. So that's tweaking the existing framework that has proven to be successful. So We don't want to get too complacent in what works. Definitely want to replicate winning, like I said, but we also may want to look outside the norm and get outside the box some and stretch our capacity for discomfort. Anyway, guys, went a little longer than I thought, but I hope this was good. Look, we had 3 points here: traction and trajectory. We had 3 keys to creating momentum and preparing for growth. Recap here: for traction, do the boring basics, the fundamentals. Don't underestimate it. Don't underestimate small ball. Don't underestimate executing a simple plan. Second one, replicate winning. Figure out what works, duplicate, double down on those resources, get rid of the ones that don't, double down on the ones that do. Create an algorithm, get that sucker in there where it's working habitually, where you don't even have to think about it. And the last one, trajectory, do some calculated risk taking, formulate a plan, take those calculated risks. You don't have to turn your world upside down, but parlay off of the things that are already working, maybe into a different niche or a different segment where a demand might be a little bit outside your comfort zone, and stretch your capacity. Get uncomfortable for a minute. Get some people around you. Collaborate with good people that you trust. So I hope that helped. I hope you got better today. With that, be blessed.